shifting the mindsets of SMEs as a whole towards ESG compliance. I think that's where MDB can play a role in terms of how you finance them, in terms of what kind of standards you put, in terms of your, I suppose, your risk and your IC, or I don't know how I imagine you have an investment committee. If that can be, if ESG practices can be encouraged, and if not put as a syarat, and after the financing is given, if there's some sort of ESG kind of program to all your investee companies or the recipients of your financing, that could be something that MDB can begin to do. Because MDB is not a company that you're supposed to do the financing like that. So I think that's where I see the gap in terms of the SME space. The bigger companies and the bigger corporations, I think we have a different kind of tailored solution for that.
I discuss. Secondly, would be, we talk about ESG. ESG is a very big word. How do you bring it down and convince the Manching and the Paching industry to appreciate ESG is the way to go, and you need to appreciate, because it's going to be in our lives in time to come. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess question number one I'll take first. In budget 2022, there was a grant, there is now a grant initiative around tax incentives for EV, so not hybrid but electric vehicles, in which there is no tax at all. So there's no excise duty, there's no sales tax, there is no road tax. So for this year at least, I'm not saying it's only for this year, for now, completely tax-free for electric vehicles. So you should go start ordering one if you can afford it. I'm sure you can. The challenge though, Adrian, on that score, if you go through the car blogs, not that I'm a big car guy, but when I saw the EV thing, I started reading more of those Paul Tan blogs and the like. The challenge is what kind of solutions and what's our plan for the charging stations. So I think the Prime Minister and government is aware of this. We began with almost the not the back end, but the most retail end of it, which is the EV itself. But earlier up in more upstream, we've got to figure out what's the charging station solution. That cannot run away from some sort of understanding with DNB or any of these other entities. And I can say with some confidence that the long-term strategic plan towards decarbonization that I mentioned twice in my remarks just now will have to include plans for charging station rollout. And who's the provider, what kind of cost to the consumer. So that's something that we have to figure out. Your second question about remind me what it was about.
The ESG and impact.
Oh yeah. How do you make it more? How do you merakyatkan ESG? I hesitate to say this, but I guess sometimes it takes unfortunate events like to remind and to give us an unwanted opportunity, not something we asked for. But now that you've had that and we've seen how devastating it's been, I think this is an opportunity to start reminding even the masses who are not in business, who are not in big corporations, who don't understand the kind of language that often you see in this kind of conversations, to internalize the very basic fact that climate emergency is really here, that banjir will become a more frequent occurrence, that there is a way and there are things that you can do to mitigate this. So I think more and more people with influence in these communities will and should speak on those terms. So personally, that's something that I will do in whatever capacity I can beyond just being an economic director. I think my other colleagues in politics as well will probably want to do the same. I am hopeful that the younger generation does not need much convincing because they read a lot, they're exposed to it, and even those who live in perhaps suburban or rural areas, if they come from a younger generation, they are exposed to these questions. Once you make the impact of climate emergency very real to them and speak in very simple, real terms, I believe the Malaysian public will catch on to it and start putting companies and government to account on how we fix it. So I'm hopeful on that front. it depends on who you finance, what sector you finance. In this case, MDB is tech. I guess a study needs to be done on what are the current practices of tech companies MDB tends to finance, right? That baseline study, I think, is something MDB maybe can do. So on those, for example, the 4 areas I mentioned, because ESG is not just simply about green economy, it's also the other areas of sustainability and governance. If you have a baseline of where these companies currently are, perhaps a condition of financing or an act after financing can include KPIs and targets around improving those metrics. So I think the baseline study and baseline metrics, MDB has to do first. And this speaks to what I mentioned earlier, there isn't a global standard yet, right? So there isn't clearly all we have is grand agenda for 30% female representation. We've got something around decarbonization. So those are the big targets. But your micro, I suppose, your milestones to get there, that's something that is think of it positively. There's freedom for every entity or agency to decide how it contributes towards that target. So I would say my humble suggestion is do a baseline and then put a target for all your financees.
Alright, thank you. So,
say that I have no mandate on Locus Standi to announce anything on behalf of government, but what I can say is we've expressed the concern that the SME space is still a bit of a grey area. I wouldn't say black box, but it's still a bit of a grey box where we haven't figured out how we get them excited or co-opt them. That big segment into the ESG journey is still very big business, big corporation type conversations. So I think I'm not yet in a space where I can speak of any incentives, but I can say that government is aware about making sure that whatever long-term strategy that we announced this year has to include an SME component. So that I can say.
thank you.